Now, you know when you're a kid and you have that experience of going out shopping with your parents and then you get to sit in the car on the journey back and you read through the instruction manual just to see how things are in the game to sort of get that pre-game experience. This is probably the last game that I did this for because I would have been in my teens around time when I played this game. And this is also an example of one of those games where I found it on GameSpot because me and Bridge used to casually run through GameSpot to see what RPGs there were. And so this game is not a Disgaea game, would you believe it or not? It is Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga. This is a very dull looking game, I suppose. It's very post-apocalyptic in that sense. And so it kind of looks like the type of setting that you would expect from a random AAA game in the late 2000s, early 2010s probably. But what was very interesting, or what I found very interesting, was the combination of this setting that wasn't associated with RPGs, at least not turn-based RPGs, and yet here we have a turn-based RPG in this particular setting, in this particular style, and I absolutely love this game. Let's talk about the mechanics of the game. Now, I've talked about a lot of the mechanics when I was talking about Digital Devil Saga 2, so I don't need to talk about the press turn system or the elemental weaknesses and all that, because all that remained the same. I want to talk about the mantra grid because in this game it is more like a skill tree, and I think it kind of, I don't want to say it makes more sense, but I think it's kind of easy to make sense of in this case compared to the second game, because this game is more like a grid with different circles that you connect with lines, and they branch out into different paths. And sometimes you'll have a node which has several routes from previous mantra on the grid, and if all of those mantra connect individually to that particular node, then it's kind of saying, well, if you unlock any of these, you can then unlock this one. But if all of those lines connect first and then go forward into the thing, that's a way of saying, okay, you need all of these as a prerequisite to be able to then get this one. And like I mentioned with Digital Devil Saga 2, I love the dungeon layout. I love the fact that we have long, big dungeons and story events are minimal. So there's lots of battles, lots of items scattered around, and you've got to find healing points and save points. And I just absolutely love it. What also blew my mind about this game as well, sort of, is the New Game Plus feature, and this game did not introduce me to New Game Plus, but New Game Plus in this game, you don't carry over your levels, you just carry over your mantra. So all the mantra that you've learned, you carry over to the New Game Plus, and let me tell you, that means so much more than levels, because the late game abilities are so powerful, but these are abilities where you have to defeat super bosses as well, and some super bosses are hidden behind big puzzles, like there's the sewer area where you have this big area with all these rapids and you've got to choose the right way to go, and I absolutely love it. But just like when you've done loads of grinding and you feel like you're towards the end of this mantra grid, it just gets bigger. Just all these extra nodes just appear, and some of the abilities on them, like Auto Soma, what does that do? It means you fully heal after every battle. Yes, that's amazing. There's some giant attacks as well, such as Almighty Element attacks, where it is impossible to defend against it. Oh yes, that's amazing. And perhaps the best ability in the entire game, which takes so much work to get, is one that grants you full immunity from every attack except for almighty attacks, which is basically protection against pretty much every battle in the game apart from super bosses. But it takes so much work to get it, trust me, it takes so much work to get it. And so in subsequent playthroughs of the game, you will just level up really fast because you're just breezing through the early parts. You don't have to fight all those enemies, just breeze past them, you get to the later stages and you can beat them on really low levels, and you'll just gain loads of karma, as it's called. Experience is called karma in this game. And this game is home to what is commonly known as the most difficult super boss in all of JRPGs, and I have fought this boss and I have failed many times, even after hours and hours of farming for stat boosting items. It is just a super hard boss. and the amount of strategy that has to go into it is amazing. The amount of strategy and luck that you need and just being able to keep up with the battle. It's one of my favourite battles of all time, to be honest. I know you might be thinking, why not just protect yourself with that ultimate ability that protects you against all those attacks? Yeah, if you do that, he kills you in one hit, so that's not going to work. But yeah, just this game is amazing. I got this game the day that it came out, and my brother also got this game the day that it came out. And I actually saw this game being played before it came out in the UK because my friend Alex from university got it on his PS3 through an American import. But this is a game that I knew about a few years before it was really made abundantly clear, I suppose. I remember seeing it as an entry on GameSpot and making a big deal about it. And this game is Disgaea 3 Absence of Justice. So yes, I have yet another Disgaea game to give me another opportunity to talk a little bit more about Disgaea mechanics. So let's talk about, first of all, a few things that make Disgaea 3 different. And I think Disgaea 3 is generally not liked so much for silly reasons. One thing that people don't like about this game is that instead of learning abilities through leveling up, you now get them with mana. And now, in addition to leveling up those abilities through using them, and I realise I haven't even touched upon leveling up abilities, as you can see, this is a very in-depth series, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Actual depth, you know, not just, it's a big world and there's a million quests. No. There is actually a lot of stuff to do in these games, and these games are just so open. Like, people talk about how they love openness these days. Disgaea is like perhaps the most open it can be, as far as I can tell, or at least amongst the most open, and yet people don't recognize it as such. But anyway, so yeah, you can learn abilities by spending mana to learn the abilities, but also, aside from just leveling them up, you can also rank them up sort of, so you have a +1 variation of fire, and you can have a +3 variation of fire, which I should also point out is different to both the level of the ability and the tier of the ability, so you can have like Giga Fire and or Mega Fire, for example, which are different tiers. But one thing this game did is that it did away with weapon proficiencies and leveling up different weapon types for characters. But it did have the classroom system where, like in Disgaea 4, you had this grid of different like monuments you could put down. This time you had a classroom and you organized your characters into different seats in this classroom. And when you reincarnated them, the different thing that you chose to reincarnate them to give them extra points will determine the quality of their desk in terms of appearance, that is. But also you can stick characters into different types of clubs, so you might have a club of, you know, badly behaved kids who sit at the back of the class, and so they get a bonus if they are in that club for sitting at the back of the class. And Disgaea 3 has this whole weird thing about how being a bad student is a good thing or something like that. It's weird. But one thing that is different about this game again is that the geocubes are different in that now they're not just pyramids that you have on top of the geopanels, but now they are stackable cubes, so you can have them on top of each other, and you can actually walk on them as well. So you might have a bunch of red cubes instead of just like a red pyramid, and standing on the red cubes will also grant the effect of whatever the red cube effect is. But also, if you throw one of these geocubes next to a bunch of cubes of its same colour, it will destroy all of those cubes, and that's how you build up a combo. And this is also incorporated into the class world, which is like a class variation of the item world. But this time, instead of having a bunch of geopanels with some cubes on it, these levels are just a load of geocubes. And by going through different characters' class worlds, you can upgrade their class to have different types of aptitudes and all that, which is just another layer on top of the class tier and all that other sort of stuff. This game also has a sort of dark world variation to it as well, and I find these interesting because if you meet certain requirements on a particular level, then you will unlock its alternate variation of it, and the alternate variation of these levels are mostly puzzle based. based, and I think this is something that's very interesting. Like, for example, there's one of these where you've got a room full of no throwing panels, so you're not allowed to throw, and the level is full of prinnies, and so the only way to defeat the prinnies is to throw them next to each other so that they blow up, and they can cause a chain reaction to blow up all of the prinnies. You have to somehow sort of walk around and get them to attack you in such a way that they are all lined up in exploding view, which I haven't even talked about prinnies yet. Like, the main mascot of Disgaea, I haven't even talked about prinnies. That's how much stuff there is. But yeah, there's all these different levels that you have to basically try to solve the puzzle, and some of the puzzles require things like you must have the ability to jump super high, which again is another stat I have not yet mentioned. There are other stats such as your capability to throw, move and jump, and the jump stat is basically how high of a ledge a character can walk up, and if you can get it really high they can just do like this humongous jump up to this like much higher platform. And some of these levels require those sort of abilities. I remember there was one of them in particular where I wasn't able to complete it because it involved some sort of complex bridge building thing. But I also think my jump wasn't high enough to be able to complete it. Just so much stuff. Just, oh my goodness. I could just talk for ages about Disgaea, but I'm resorting to giving brief overviews of little things that span far beyond my ability to explain them in a short amount of time. Oh boy! Welcome to what is potentially the most controversial item on this entire list. If Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons wasn't the most controversial, and Ocarina of Time wasn't the most controversial for ranking those games as low as I did, this is going to be, without a doubt, the most controversial for ranking this as high as I do, and I stand by everything I say. And the reason that this is controversial is because this is a go-to game that people will use as an example of a terrible, terrible game that was horrible in every way. And I was very excited to get this game. I remember the day before it came out, I had a dream about going to Game Station to get the game using braid mechanics, so I dreamt that the game itself was glowing green so I could just run there, get it, and then like rewind time to get back. It's very strange, but yeah, this game is Final Fantasy 13. And yeah, it is very strange that Final Fantasy 13 I would also rank at number 13, but all of the complaints about this game I believe fall under two categories. One, irrelevant, or two, just wrong, just basically incorrect. So I will explain the mechanics of this game. I will start by talking about the battle system specifically, because in the battle system you have up to 3 characters and you have this ATB bar, as it's called. And so the bar charges up and it has so many different slots that it charges up, and you choose your abilities to use, and then once the bar is fully charged it will use up all of those abilities. You can also press triangle, if we're going by PS3 controls here, to sort of cut it mid-charge and then just use what you've got built up. And different abilities will require different amounts of charge in order to be able to use. You can also press the L1 button to then choose between one of 6 paradigms, and a paradigm is one setup of the different roles that you have assigned for your characters, which is basically the same as how it works for Final Fantasy 13-2, which I talked about before, but this time you have 3 characters as opposed to 2 characters and a monster. And the roles are the same. You have Commando, which is useful for doing the damage, the non-elemental damage, and maintaining the stagger so that their shield doesn't recover, basically. Ravager, which is kind of the opposite. It damages their stagger so that they become more vulnerable to attacks, but it also means that their stagger recovers faster. Medic, which heals. Sentinel, which is a tank. Synergist, which buffs, and Saboteur, which debuffs. And you can set up to 6 paradigms, which is basically a different setting, and you can switch between any one of those presets that you've had to you then just go ahead and attack the enemy. Now, the game does have something called auto attack. Now, this is a thing that people have a go at. Well, one of the things. Okay, auto attack is not select all the best things. It is a random selection of all of the available actions that has not yet been proven to be strictly dominated. So I will give you an example. Say an enemy is weak to fire. Okay, you choose auto attack for a character's Ravager. They will use Blizzard, Thunder, Fire, Blizzard, or something like that. And then that will reveal that they are weak to fire. And so the game ticks that off and says, oh, they're weak to fire. Therefore, fire is a better ability to use against them. So then, next time you auto attack with that Ravager, they will go fire, 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 fire instead. So it's not choose the best things, it's the bare basics. It is definitely not the optimal strategy that some people think that it is. And there is a lot of timing and a lot of juggling going on because you need to keep everything maintained. You need to keep their stagger maintained. You need to keep healed. You need to keep your buffs up because buffs are important. You need to keep their debuffs up because that's also important. And if they're going to release an attack, you'll want to defend, or possibly you'll want to sentinel in order to recover their own HP, or just allow you to lengthen the battle for whilst your other characters are doing their own thing. As for leveling up the characters, each character has 3 primary roles that they can level up, and then eventually you unlock the character's secondary roles. So each character does get eventually access to all of the roles, but the 3 that they are best at, they can level them up way faster, and the game does cap your leveling capabilities based on your story progression. So the Crystarium, which is sort of like this skill tree thing, and each character has a different skill tree for each individual role, and each of those is unique to each other. So say Lightning's medic is different to Hope's medic, despite the fact that they are both a medic in one of their primary roles. It's still different. But the purpose of all this is that when you defeat enemies, you will still get the CP, the resource that you will use to spend to level up those characters. But the reason that this plot capping affects the game is because sometimes you will still have CP left over on abilities that, or stat boosts, that are inefficient to get. So you might have like HP plus 30 for 10,000 CP or whatever, whereas that same amount would cost 3,000 or something, and so you want to kind of hold on to that CP until after you've defeated the boss so that you can then spend it more effectively. Or, if you're really struggling with the boss, you might have to go ahead and spend it suboptimally in the long run in order to make this benefit in the short run. And the same applies for the secondary roles as well. You unlock the secondary roles before they really become effective to use, but same thing applies. And the secondary roles, by the way, are much more linear. They are just a straight line and they cost so much CP, so it's mostly for like that little bit extra of post-game grinding. Now, let's talk about the linearity, and this is a big thing that I want to touch upon, because this is something that I keep saying all the time. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. People say when you get the pulse, it opens up, and therefore it becomes better. No, it's good from the start. And just because you have a big field to run around in, or just because you can go and do these missions in a particular order, that doesn't necessarily mean that the game is amazing because of that running around thing. It doesn't make it terrible because you're running in a straight line for the other part. And even still, even if it was a direct straight line, which it isn't really, but even if it was, so what? You're still doing the fun thing, which is the leveling and the fighting and all that lovely stuff. And let's talk about the post game for a second with all of the different extra missions and all that. What's really nice is that in this game, all of your characters level up equally despite who you use. Now, I'm not saying that this is a universal good thing, and I know some people who have said it's a universal good thing, but it's absolutely not. It is in no way a universal good thing. But it works very well for this game in particular, because in this game, despite what people say, again, people always talk nonsense about this game, but the characters are so vastly different, and yet they are so well balanced as well, because each character, even the ones that specialise in the same roles, so for example, Fang and Vanille both specialise in Saboteur, and they are the only 2 characters that specialise in Saboteur. They will learn different abilities at different rates. So for example, Fang will learn things like Stop, Daze and Poison, whereas Vanille will learn debuffs like Deprotect and Deshell and all that. And even if you look at the 2 primary synergists, Hope and Saz, Saz can learn Haste early on and things that increase your strength and general attack power. Hope is the other way around. He's more of a defensive synergist. So they've even got that variation. And one thing that is kind of amazing is that even characters who don't specialize in a thing can in some situations be better at that thing than other characters. And I will use Fang as an example of this, because Fang as a synergist, she is not a primary synergist, she's a secondary synergist. She will learn abilities like Faith Ra and Brave Ra, and these are in all effectiveness worse than the Bravery and Faith variations, because Brave Ra basically has a stronger effect than Bravery. It will increase your strength by more than Bravery does, but it only lasts for a tiny fraction of the time. But there are some extra bosses where you will have plenty of rebuffing opportunities, so in some cases that's better. And like I said, with different types of characters having different types of things across the different roles, and I was talking about like the different saboteur abilities that Vanille will learn versus the saboteur abilities that Fang will learn. Hope, who is not a primary saboteur, will have more access to all of the different debuffs that those primary saboteurs don't. But what makes Hope's saboteur worse off is that he only gains access to the area of effect style debuff. So if you're fighting against a lot of enemies, maybe Hope is a better saboteur in specific situations than Vanille and Fang. And I just love this level of depth and variation that goes into all these different characters. And I was saying before about how all of the characters level up equally and how that's a good thing in this game, and the reason for that is because there's so much diversity within these characters, and because there's so much balance with each of these characters. For every one of these extra missions that you'll come across, at least a lot of them, you will have to stop and think about which characters you're going to use for this specific battle. It's not a case of who you leveled up in the long run, it's more of a case of what works best here, and in this case that works very well. So yes, Final Fantasy 13, I don't care how many people want to tell me that you just mash X, or however many people tell me that it's linear. I have played this game for a couple hundred hours, and you saying any of those things isn't going to change the pure love that I have for this game and just the fascination that I have with how deep these systems can go. Because, I mean, I know what I like, and so that is that.